Iran will rebuild their nuclear sites, those ones that were damaged during the 12-day war with Israel. That is the announcement from Iranian President Masoud Pezeshkian. Now, US President Trump has in the past threatened to strike Iran again if they rebuild their nuclear sites that was struck by American B-2 bombers at the end of the 12-day war. But that seems not to have deterred the Iranian government from making this announcement. In fact, they said, "Hold my Shahid drone, I've got one better for you. I've agreed with Russia to build 8 new nuclear reactors in my country to provide huge amounts of energy in the future for civilian use for my roughly 90 million strong population. Deal with that." Now, Iran reiterates, I should point out, that they have no intention of using their nuclear technology to build weapons, but rather they want to pursue nuclear technology for civilian use. Power generation and medicine are two of the biggest examples of their use of nuclear technology for the betterment of Iranian citizens. Now, whether Iran's allies or whether Iran's adversaries or even their allies believe that public stance of the Iranian state that we don't want weapons, whether they believe that is, of course, another matter entirely. But I'm talking about what they're saying openly, right? And what they're saying publicly. The International Atomic Energy Agency Chief Rafael Grossi said earlier this year that there is no evidence that Iran was building a nuclear weapon. It only seems that US officials and Israeli officials feel that Iran is building a nuclear weapon, or feel that someone needs to hear that Iran is building a nuclear weapon, potentially to manufacture consent, perhaps, amongst citizenry in the Western world for aggressive action against Iran. That is a possibility, of course. But for the US and the Western powers of Europe, it's not enough that Iran just says we will not build a weapon. It's not enough that Iran doesn't physically have a demonstration of weaponized nuclear technology. That's not enough. Civilian use, nah, bruv. You're a Muslim country. Civilian use is, you're in the Middle East, Middle East. You're not under our thumb. You're not under the Western sphere of influence. You're not on a leash that is held by one of the Western powers. So, of course, civilian use, you can talk about it all you want, but, you don't have the right. You don't have the right. So they reimposed sanctions on Iran with that framing that Iran is breaking a deal, the JCPOA, POA that the US broke first. I don't know how they expected only one side to keep the deal. The other side breaks it and walks off. And then, anyway, that's old news now. Basically, the Western powers said that Iran is getting too frisky with their nuclear techie. Not their exact words, sorry. I wrote that down. I wanted to slot that in. I thought this was a good time. It wasn't even that much of a good line, to be honest. So, oh well, one take. We carry on. That's all the news. Now here's the analysis. Iran is in a much stronger geopolitical position. And you won't hear this on Western news reporting or even analysis, but here are the fact-backed assessments that I have for you. Iran is in a much stronger position, geopolitically speaking, than it may have been in if a collection of outcomes, events, factors turned out just a bit different from how they actually turned out after the 12-day war. Israel, Iran's chief adversary in the region, is diplomatically, economically, militarily more isolated today than arguably they have ever been in their entire short history as a modern nation state. Now, that was not guaranteed for Iran. The situation for Israel might have been far more favorable for Israel and therefore unfavorable for Iran, but this is how the cookie has crumbled. Not only is Israel more isolated than ever, Iran is looking more connected to the global south than ever. China has been making public declarations of working with Iran, reported by CGTN, South China Morning Post, and a slew of other smaller and local news outlets in China. So has Russia. Russian partnerships with Iran look to be strengthening even more. And through China's mediation and support, especially countries in the Middle East, traditionally under America's sphere of influence, traditionally positioning themselves as a rival to Iran, or a nation that sees Iran as a threat. Those countries even have been mending ties with the Persian fortress state. We're talking Turkey, we're talking Saudi Arabia being prime examples, both to some extent within the Western sphere of influence, yet with China's cooperation, with China's nudging, mending and closening their ties with the Iranian state. Russia and Chinese defense technology, another example, another domain. More Russia and China's military technology has been transferred across defense, across missile capabilities, across drone, both ways. Obviously, Iranian Shahed drones going into Russian Geran production lines. Aircraft, potentially, right? The Chengdu J-10s that we heard about. There's a lot of tech transfer. And a final point, more respect, you could say, diplomatic prestige from global South nations has been garnered on the Iranian state. Rhetoric from the Iranian state after the 12-day war has sounded a lot more reasonable, a lot more defensive, a lot more pro-multilateralism, pro-keeping the peace compared to their adversary, Israel, which initiated the 12-day war and got very rhetorically aggressive and physically aggressive. On top of all of that, right, economic, military, diplomatic standing, Iran also internally has a more galvanized citizenry due to Israeli aggression during the 12-day war, because Iranians, a lot of them, do not like the current Iranian administration. By the way, that's a framing you'll hear all over the West. But what about the approval ratings in Western countries? What about the United States, apparently a democracy, hybrid democracy, pay-to-win democracy, whatever you want to call it? What about those countries? You think approval ratings for their supreme leader, Ayatollah Trump, is fine? No, of course not. But that's democracy, that's fine, right? That's the West, that's okay. Approval ratings for Keir Starmer here in the UK, below 20% by some polling. That's fine, that's not a dictatorship. That's completely, absolutely progressive, liberal, advanced. But Iran, problematic. Have you seen Iran's House of Parliament? Iran has a... it doesn't matter. I'll save that topic for another video. I'm not claiming Iran's a democracy, by the way, but I'm just contesting or challenging the framing that Iran bad, everything there bad, and the framing that the West good, everything here super progressive, we're the beacon of the world, we're the shining light in the night sky, blah 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 blah. Right? That's not entirely accurate, to put it gently. And as I was saying before I went off on this meander, the Iranian people, loads of them, from what I can tell, are particularly unhappy with the current theocratic republic setup of the Iranian government after 1979, the Islamic Revolution. They don't want that. They want something different. Maybe they don't want the Shah, but they want something different. But let me tell you what they don't want. They don't want their whole country to go from what it is now into puppet state serving Israel. They definitely don't want that. So Israel's 12-day war in Iran galvanized, meaning strengthened the bonds between the Iranian citizenry. They were like, listen, we can argue about our governance internally. That's a family issue, as it were. But we don't need to air out our dirty laundry on the clothesline outside and show everyone what we wear and what our family members wear, and it's just hanging off a clothesline for everyone to see. No. We definitely have problems, but they're not as bad as if Israel came in and balkanized the state, fragmented it into like 5 different regions based on religious leanings or ethnic background. We definitely don't want a unified Iran under the Shah, who sits under Netanyahu. Like the majority of people, absolutely not in Iran, would absolutely not support that. Okay, that's the factual on the ground sentiment in Iran does not support that setup. So they are galvanized against Israeli aggression, and in an absence of Israeli aggression, they can work on protesting or fighting back against the overstepping of the current Iranian state. They can work to change the Iranian state, whatever they want. That's internal. But when an outside force attacks, they need to get together and fight back. That's the framing. I'm not calling on them to do that. That's what actually happened during the 12-day war and afterwards. That's what we saw. Now, not only all of that, but other countries traditionally considered Israel's collaborators or aligned states, at least at a state level, not at a citizenry level. We're talking your Egypt, your Jordan, your Turkey, your Saudi Arabia to some extent. They've been leaning away from supporting Israel, which will delight Iran further, of course. If your main rival suddenly has more enemies to deal with, that means less pressure on you. Now, don't get me wrong. Iran was hit hard during the 12-day war. Loads of people are like, Mahfouz, why are you glazing Iran for? You know, what is this copium? I'm not saying Iran is in a fantastic state. I'm saying it's in a better state than the Israeli state post-12-day war. The direction of progress of each side, Israel's taken a nosedive, Iran's gone up. That's all I'm saying, trajectory-wise, geopolitical positioning-wise. They were hit hard, though, the Iranians. But the key point, going back to what I'm saying, is Israel was hit back. That's very unique, right? That's very unique. These lot, the Israeli Defense Force, are a fighting force that are used to facing aunties with flower pattern hijabs, remember. They're used to teenagers with maybe the deadliest weapon in their arsenal, a rock or a pebble, right? These are soldiers that have more experience than any other army in the world. Air Force, the Army, the Navy, the Air Force. They have more experience, especially the Air Force, in striking hospitals, in striking bakeries, in striking UN schools. This is now reported by Western media over the last 2 years in Gaza, right? When it comes to fighting another nation-state's military, though, nah, bruv. After 12 days, they were like, what the hell is happening? They can hit back? I didn't expect that. What's going on? Nah, bro, this conflict was not promised to me. I don't need to defend myself over there anymore. You can please, America, Big Daddy, please help. and Big Daddy brokered a ceasefire for them. And Iran wanted that ceasefire as well, by the way. They don't want a protracted war. They didn't want even a war. That's why Iran didn't attack first. Israel attacked first. Will the Western media tell you that? Probably not. Will I tell you that? Yes, without the spin, so that you can decide for yourself where you sit on any matter. So you can decide for yourself to go further research on whatever it is I am covering. Now, Iran continues to strengthen itself, further solidify its defensive posture, and its strike back capabilities vis-a-vis their missiles, their drone technology. And Israel prepares too. I'm not saying they're helpless, far from it. But the odds are looking less and less favorable, analytically speaking, for the so-called only democracy in the Middle East, for the so-called most moral army in the world. It's the odds are stacked more against it now than when they first initiated their 12-day war, opening shots. Also, I want to point out, if things do pop off now, it's analytically speaking, more factors are problematic for Israel than when they first started off, right? So they would have a harder time just looking at the details that are publicly available, at least, and then analyzing them and deferring to the analysis of other geopolitical analysts, far better than myself. It looks like the Israeli state would struggle more now than during the 12-day war. And during the 12-day war, they struggled so much that they had to broker a ceasefire. They had to accept, or some people say beg. It depends on the framing you want to ascribe to. But they had to accept a ceasefire after just less than 12 weeks. Sorry, after less than 12 days, after less than 2 weeks. This is the same state that was doing a madness in Gaza for 2 years. They lasted less than a fortnight against Iran, after which they were like, bruv, our cities look like, we've got districts that look like wet cardboard. I don't know what they're firing, these hypersonics, but we need to call it. We need to call it a day. Or America, please come help us. And America wasn't willing to help them that much. They said, I'll drop a cheeky B-2 bomber strike, the GBU-57 massive ordnance penetrators, MOPS, and then, it's up to you if you want to keep fighting. And they said, we don't want to keep fighting. They agreed to a ceasefire, essentially. Right, so it's not looking good for Israel, for better or worse. Just giving you the information. Analytically speaking, it does not look good for Israel, but 3 months from now, it will look even worse for Israel. 6 months from now, it will likely look even worse for Israel if the trajectories of today are maintained. Because Iran is on the up and up, Israel's on the down in terms of isolation, and we have not seen any reconciliation. We have not seen those isolations be rolled back at a state level. Countries continue to isolate. Citizenry continue to call on Israel to be further isolated by whatever country these citizens are in, including in the Arab states where public protest is not really a thing like it is in the West. Even there, behind closed doors, you have people in power being whispered to in very frustrated voices. There's a lot of stuff going on in their ears. They're like, what the flip do you want? And they're like, we want, look what's happening. Can we stop supporting that, please? If we're not going to support the other side, can we at least stop supporting the aggressor, the occupier? The occupier. And nation states like the Gulf monarchies, they're having to adjust their policy to keep a lid on their citizenry. Time will tell how things turn out. for the most moral army in the world? Will they have to fight another actual army rather than, you know, a bunch of guys in, I don't know, sandals, flip-flops, running around with Kalashnikovs or whatever in tunnels underground dug from, I don't know, Russian shovels? I don't know. By the way, if the IDF is the most moral army in the world, then I am the most slim, in shape, healthy Asian man with the bushiest, largest beard and the most expensive animation budget on the face of this planet. For the unbiased news and analysis without the Western spin, ladies and gentlemen, my name is Mahfouz or NewsBaba, and I'll see you on the next one.